Welcome everybody to our Wednesday Ready to Teach week session. Why does assessment need to change? Before we start the session, I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country. The University of Queensland acknowledges the traditional owners and their custodianship of the lands on which we meet. And I'd like to recognise that these lands have always been used for dialogue, teaching and inquiry. We pay our respects to their ancestors and their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country, and we recognise their valuable contributions to Australian and global society. So welcome everybody, as I said, to this session on why assessment needs to change. I'd like to introduce our presenter for today, Jacinta Lysak. She is an incredibly experienced educator across school, government and the higher education sector. And she specialises in assessment and technology-enabled learning. So we're incredibly lucky to have her as part of the digital assessment team here in Italy. Jacinta's also completing her PhD in the student experience of assessment. So she really is a wonderful resource for all of us. And I'm excited about her presentation today. Why does assessment need to change? I'm very, very keen to see the responses to those questions. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jacinta.
Thanks so much, Jackie, for that lovely introduction. I really appreciate it. So good to see so many people joining us today and hopefully watching the recording later. I also wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we're meeting today. I wanted to acknowledge their continuing connections to culture and country, because I also acknowledge that these places have always been places of teaching and learning. Okay, so if we have a look at our workshop for today, we've broken it up into a few key topics. So the three big topics that we're going to explore through questions and answers and engagement with you are looking at the when, why and benefits of assessment change, as well as ideas for how we can go about changing our assessment in ways that are manageable. We'll also explore some examples of questions that apply ideas. We'll look at what we can find for support at the moment and coming up for assessment design. And because we're sharing an Inspira question set at the end, we'll let you know how we've shared that with you. So, as Jackie said, the purpose of our workshop today is to answer the key question, why does assessment need to change? And so to do that, I thought it'd be great if we could exchange some ideas together with exploring what the benefits can be when we need to change our assessment, because we know we'll need to change it because it is inevitable. There's always something that needs to be updated. And so I thought if we explored ideas for making incremental enhancements over time, we could look to some researched ideas to inform what we do. In terms of interaction, we've already started sharing in the chat, so thank you very much. We've also had people sharing with mic and video, and that's all great too. There'll be different times you can do that. We'll try some poll questions as well. And the Padlet that we make, it'd be so good today if everyone could contribute, because we're hoping to build the Padlet in a way that it becomes a resource. So when you're invited, please contribute. In terms of what we can do after today, we'd like to give you ideas to take away and apply to your assessment. And we've also set up some writing sessions for early in the semester that are optional for you to attend. And if you can make it, we'd love to see you there. So as I was saying, in terms of the sharing of ideas, later on we'll share a link to the Padlet with you, plus all the Zoom functionality there. I also wanted to let you know that we'll share the slides with you in an email after the workshop. So that can be handy to know if you're furiously taking notes or not, knowing you'll get those slides. So I also wanted to let you know that we've really tried to make sure that the ideas that we're sharing with you are the kinds of things that you could do on their own as an individual idea, or you could combine them if it makes sense for you to do a few things at once. And we've tried to share ideas that are relevant to you, regardless of the discipline that you're in, as well as looking at different types of assessment, where even though we'll share some examples today of digital assessment, the ideas aren't restricted to that. So use your imagination and apply them to whatever context you're in. So I wanted to start by asking the first question, which is, when is change good in assessment design? And to do this is where I wanted to invite you to go to the Padlet so that we can get started sharing ideas. I might stop sharing the slides and go have a look at the Padlet. I'm sure that there's already a link to the Padlet in the chat. Thanks so much. So we'll go have a look. Okay, so we've got first question there. When is change good? Is there a good time for assessment design change? I'll just pause for a moment and see how we go with any ideas. Great. So I just refreshed to find a few ideas. Good to see. So I'll just read them out so we can chat through them. So from Lorna, we've got big events to respond to changes in technology and approaches. For example, ChatGPT. Absolutely. So when we get new technology, sometimes it can push us to make changes that we weren't necessarily expecting as well. Enhanced learning outcomes from Anonymous. Thank you. Small changes from Lorna. Tanya, each semester to ensure the assessment meets the UQ P&L. Tanya, could you remind us what you mean by P&L?
Policy and procedures.
Policy and procedures. Awesome. So Jackie, each semester, because different policy, academic integrity, more interesting to mark. Yes. So that the markers are seeing something different all the time. And Luke, when the practice of the discipline changes and new assessment is needed to be authentic. Great. So a couple of ideas there about when a new semester rolls around. Sometimes that's when it's a good time to change. So that's really good. Thanks so much for sharing. I might jump out of the Padlet and go back to the slides. Great. So now to the big question for the whole workshop. Why does assessment need to change? This is where I wanted to find out from you to share again in the Padlet. Why? Why do we need to change? Okay, so we've already got some ideas going up for question 2 in the Padlet. I'm going to just start sharing what they look like. And so Jackie's saying that assessment needs to be relevant. So that's one good reason why we need to change our assessment. Luke's saying experimentation is inherently a good thing and creates new possibilities and new approaches, even though they're imperfect. Academic integrity, an idea from Tanya. Gen AI implications. Changing needs of industry. Yeah. So I will just pause and wait for a moment and see if there's anyone else in the group that wanted to contribute. Thanks, Lorna, to improve student outcomes. Absolutely. Excellent. Okay. Just going to jump back to our slides. So we've already got about half a dozen ideas there for why assessment needs to change. And we've got a couple more that are being added to. Dale's just added that sometimes the learning outcomes change and therefore we need to change the assessment. So that makes sense. And I also had a few ideas to share as well. So because assessment design is complex and iterative, it means that over time, incrementally, there will be change inherently. And I like to think of assessment as something that is not set and forget, so that I can be at ease with the idea that I was expecting something to change. It might not have been something I anticipated, but as someone's already highlighted, it could be something in technology like Gen AI that pops up, and now we have to reconsider what we're doing in our assessment. I've also got a few other ideas on screen that I want to share with you, things that made sense to me. And I'm just going to cross-check with our Padlet and see if there's anything that I've got there that hasn't already been mentioned. And it looks like a couple of extra ideas might be that sometimes when we've got a program that's connected to industry, there could be some changes in industry. And so our work integrated learning might change, and therefore our assessment. And also, you know, universities are a place of research, and maybe there are new findings in the discipline that we're teaching. And so we wanted to incorporate those and update our assessment in light of new research. And I'm seeing a few others that are already there. Our professional standards too are something that can change. Again, for some courses, their learning objectives are closely tied to those professional standards, which might change. And staff feedback is another one too. So maybe you've taught it, marked it, and you've talked to your team and you've got ideas for why assessment might need to change. And I can see a lot more ideas have been added to the Padlet too. So thanks so much. Okay, so if we have a look then for benefits. So now that we've thought about, well, when assessment might change and why, maybe we could start talking about then the benefits. You know, what are the good things from changing our assessment? There's also some ideas being shared in chat as well. And Luke's just sharing that sometimes assessment needs to change because of staff availability and logistical concerns. Absolutely.
Jacinta, I hope you don't mind me making a comment about that, but I do remember how idealistic I was in my early time in higher education. And then, you know, when I was faced with marking 287 something or others, you know, sort of rethinking my approach. I think resourcing is definitely, like you said at the beginning, we want to make changes to our assessment that are manageable. So, yeah, good point.
Thanks so much. That makes a lot of sense too, Jackie. Absolutely. So I've just updated the Padlet with question 3 so that we can start sharing ideas about it can actually, like, why it can be a good thing to change our assessment. So Adriana, thanks for sharing. It looks like you've got an idea that Jackie shared earlier about making sure that your assessment is relevant, and you just added that the learning itself, the process and the outcomes also have to be relevant. More engaging for students. That's a good one from Jackie too. Thank you. Just making sure I give you some time. I'm going to stop sharing slides and we'll have a look at the Padlet again. So there are some ideas. So a benefit of changing assessment from Tanya is improved student outcomes. Lorna, reduced marking load for the same learning benefit. Absolutely, like looking at how we can make the marking process more efficient for staff. Yeah, so Luke's got different student cohorts. So maybe you have students with different interests and needs, different types of feedback that they're sharing maybe. More efficiency from Tanya, where the way that you design your assessment could also decrease questions from students, I'm thinking that means, and also less marking time. So there can be benefits for students and staff. Fantastic. Okay, I'll just stop sharing Padlet and we'll jump back to the slides. Okay, so I also thought of some benefits for assessment change as well, and they're up on screen. So I'm going to do, again, a quick cross-check and see if I've thought of something that hasn't been shared in the Padlet. And I mean, one benefit could be that when we look at the way that we design our assessment, we can change the process of question writing in a way that can be more manageable. And we might come up with ideas of writing up those questions, scenarios, case studies, etc., with a way that is less laborious, if you like. Improved responses from students. So it could be improved responses in terms of the way they answer to help with the marking, but it could also be to support improved student achievement. Improved student feedback can be a benefit too. A few of you have already picked up on that, where the assessment that we're sharing with our students, you know, the students like to tell us about it when they either maybe love the assessment or don't love the assessment. We don't often hear about how good the assessment is when it's in between. So when we get it right and the students really appreciate it, they do tell us, and that can be a real benefit, getting that positive feedback. And just a few more ideas in the Padlet. So Lorna's got better industry alignment for students, help make it more relevant. Jackie's got more efficient and consistency with the quality of responses from students, particularly where you might need to address an academic integrity concern, for sure. Okay, so there are benefits. So then we're agreed. Assessment will change. We know it will probably change around the start of a new semester, you know, when we're getting ready to send out more assessment. And we've all just agreed that there are some benefits for changing assessment. That's good to know. However, of course, there are negatives too. So negatives are inevitable, just like change is inevitable. And some of those negatives can be really quite intense. However, today I wanted to focus on the positives. I wanted to use a strengths-based approach to think about the things that are within our control that we can work with to make it work for us in terms of giving our students quality assessment each semester and making those incremental changes for expected and unexpected issues. And so now I wanted to talk about the how, okay? So I wanted to now introduce some ideas about assessment design, where we could look to research and see what ideas are being shared there. And so I'm going to share quite a few ideas with you, and probably too many for you to take in all at once. So I'm hoping that after I talk through some of the research-informed ideas, you could have at least one idea that you've taken note of that you would like to apply to enhance your assessment. So I'm not sure if you want to use actual post-it notes because you've got pen and paper next to you, or you've got notes on your screen. But just find a way now to think, okay, well, if I see something I like, how are you going to note it so that later on when you get the chance to apply it, you've got it there. And I wanted to focus on 5 key approaches that are research informed, and they are featured on the Italy website. So the Institute for Teaching and Learning Innovation here at UQ. And so the first one there is the 3 principles, which is from Emerge Education and JISC. Also constructive alignment from Biggs and Tang, as well as back mapping or backward design from Wiggins and McTighe. We'll also have a look at universal design for learning from CAST and the digital teaching threshold standards from UQ. So now that you can see I'm looking at 5 approaches to give you ideas today, you can see why I'm saying just think about one idea you'd like to apply, and you will get the slides later, so you'll have a copy of all of these ideas too. So when we look at the first idea, the 3 principles for assessment design, they're organised by 3 key points. So, you know, designing our assessment so that it's relevant, it has adaptability, and it has trustworthiness. And within all of that, today I just wanted to focus on, within relevance, looking at digitally enabled assessment, within adaptability, student-centred assessment, as well as assessment that's efficient and manageable, particularly for staff, and within trustworthiness, looking at academic integrity as well. And I've got a cue there because I wanted to invite you to complete a Zoom poll. And I'm just going to have a look to see where that is. So I wanted you to think about this semester, looking at those 5 key points that I've drawn out of the 3 principles. If you could let us know, out of those 5, what would be a focus for you this semester? Just waiting. Excellent. I can see a few of you have started responding. And so far we've got selections from the 5 different focus. So it looks like everyone's contributed. So I'm just going to end the poll and share results. So hopefully you can see those results, okay? And it looks like everyone's really keen to make assessment change that's manageable. That's 86%. And then student-centered would be the next top focus for people. And that's a tie then with being efficient and looking at academic integrity. And we've got a couple of people interested in assessment that's digitally enabled. Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing. That's really interesting to see that these things are relevant to your practice for assessment design. So I'm going to stop sharing that. Okay. So the next idea I wanted to talk to you about was looking at approaches together. So when we talk about constructive alignment and back mapping, they're 2 things that overlap and cross over. So I wanted to talk about them together. And so the idea here is, if we look at all the different course elements that we have, how can we align them or help make them match as closely as possible for consistency and just to link everything together for our students. So when it comes to learning objectives, it's looking at the cognitive verbs and content and just making sure that they're linking in with the teaching and learning sequence. So the activities that are happening in class, the pedagogical approaches, the theory and practical content that we cover, but also looking at, well, now that we know what those learning objectives are and how we're going to teach it, making sure that our assessment assesses what it intends to assess through our rubric descriptors and our task descriptions. And if we say something's linking to graduate attributes and professional standards, just making sure that they are absolutely there for everyone to see. And then the other 2 approaches that I wanted to talk about together as well was universal design for learning and digital teaching threshold standards. So these 2 frameworks, if you like, tend to overlap. So I wanted to talk about them together because when I look at them, I think about, well, how can we design and build assessment where we're thinking about the positive experience for both staff and students? So it could be students to complete the assessment, staff to write it and mark it. And so it's thinking about, well, which question types are going to help students demonstrate what they understand, know, and can do, versus how can we structure the information for the assessment and display it for students so that it's clear and simple in terms of content and stimulus. And also settings and instructions, which can sometimes be overlooked, where, you know, default settings can often be applied because we haven't had the opportunity to pause and think, is this the best way to set it out? So I wanted to ask you another poll question. And that is, if there was an approach here that you would like to know more about. So of the 4, is there something you'd like to know more about? I can see already there's interest in UDL and the back mapping. Constructive alignment. Okay. Maybe everyone's responded, so I can end the poll there. And I'll share results. So hopefully you can see that. It looks like we've got most people interested in universal design for learning, which I know has been a bit of a flavour of the week this week for Ready to Teach Week workshops. And then back mapping and constructive alignment are of interest. And potentially you're already familiar with and very aware of the digital teaching threshold standards, and that's why you don't want to know more. Maybe you already know what you need to know, and that's why you didn't get a response. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'm just going to stop sharing results now. Head back to the PowerPoint. So I wanted to share with you a few ideas in terms of this idea of constructive alignment and back mapping. I wanted to highlight two key benefits from my point of view, from the lens that I use for assessment design. And when I think about making sure that things line up and that my assessment back maps from the end in sight, meaning the assessment itself, all the way back to the teaching and learning sequence, I feel comfortable that it means that I'm designing assessment that's valid and reliable. And when we say valid, we mean that the links are clear between what we're teaching, what we're assessing, and it's transparent so that everyone can see that we've actually gone to the effort to make that alignment. Also, with reliable assessment, this idea of actually using the criteria that we've written to use to make judgments for the students' work in their assessment, and for consistency. So reliable assessment generates those consistent judgments, not so much individual, because we're using the criteria. And so if we look then at the purpose, so when we think about valid assessment, the purpose of it is for students and teachers to see that the assessment will actually assess what is intended to be assessed, which sounds really simple, but sometimes we need to pause, review our assessment, and just check that along the way, the little changes that we've made along the way haven't lost that line of sight and that connection and alignment between what we intended and what we're actually getting. A key purpose for making sure our assessment is reliable is so that we can have those consistent judgments about the quality of student work from the teachers marking it. So actually using the rubric criteria descriptors instead of comparing student work with each other. So actually looking at what everyone was looking at to start with, those criteria descriptors, and not waiting till the work comes in and that side-by-side comparison. The idea then, if we're all using the criteria reference judgments, is that the marks should be comparable, and over time and different markers, we should be getting, consistently the same piece of work would get a 6 out of 7. Even if 3 different markers marked it, it's just making sure we get that consistency. And so a few ideas then to apply so that we can really double check, cross-check and review our assessment and maybe make some small changes is just check and see, well, what words are we using? When we say we're assessing a particular learning objective, are we using words from that objective? Are we using the appropriate cognitive verb, the content topics that are reinforced throughout the program from assessment and all the way through the teaching and learning sequence, activities in class, etc. It could be that you're using headings, titles, or codes in the materials that you make so that that alignment that you've gone to the trouble of doing is transparent for your students to see, for your staff to see. Also just reviewing the rubric, making sure it's up to the job to help you make judgments about the quality of student work, and just an idea to think about where you go to the trouble of reviewing your assessment, or where you're marking assessment or designing it and you think, if there was this minor change in the future that I could make, could be a word in a learning objective, it could be the way that you've worded the task itself or a particular question. Gee, wouldn't it make marking easier, or wouldn't it make the student inquiries fewer if we could just change this wording? And then that way your assessment should target what it intends to, and you might get some more consistency in terms of the way your assessment is taught, the way it's delivered, the way it's responded to by students, and the marking itself. So I had another poll question. Let's launch that for you now. And the next question I wanted to ask you was, what ideas are you already using? Because some of these ideas that I'm sharing with you are really just reminders of all the great things that you know and are already doing. So I just wanted to find out what you're doing. So are you already using words from learning objectives throughout your course materials? Are you already reinforcing those words and that vocabulary throughout what you do the whole semester? Some of you might already be using those headings and codes and strong use of the rubric, making updates as needed. So it looks like everyone's responding, and we're seeing some variation there. It looks like the responses have slowed down. So I'm just going to end the poll and show you what our results are. Okay, so it looks like most of you are already making sure that you use the words consistently from the learning objectives throughout the course materials, and also using your rubric to judge the quality of student work as well. And also some of you are already reinforcing that vocabulary throughout the course, using the headings and codes, and making updates as needed. So yeah, you already know some wonderful things to do to ensure quality assessment practices. I'm just going to stop sharing the results and head back to the slide. So good ideas, not new ideas, and not unfamiliar to you, I'm sure. But hopefully by the end of the session, there will be something new that you could try that you haven't thought of yet. So we'll move on from there. I also wanted to start talking to you about the idea of universal design for learning, which is something, again, that I've noticed has been talked about a bit this week in the Ready to Teach Week workshops. So I thought I'd start by asking you what you already know. So I'm going to launch the next poll question for you. And this time I want you to let us know if you already know about UDL and you already use it in your assessment, or maybe you know about UDL, but you're not yet using it in your assessment. You haven't had that opportunity, or maybe you aren't familiar with it and it's not something you've heard of. So we should talk about it and learn more about it. Just waiting to see if we have any other respondents. Okay. I think we've got everyone now, so I'll end the poll and share results with you. Okay. So it looks like no one's yet had the opportunity to incorporate ideas from UDL into their assessment. But 3 of you are already familiar with what UDL is, and you're just waiting for that opportunity to incorporate it into assessment. And a few of you are not familiar with UDL. So I'm sure I won't be the first person to share ideas from UDL with you today. Thanks for sharing. I'll just stop the results there. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the slides then and we'll unpack it. It's good for me to know that some of you are familiar with it and others are not. So I thought the value in looking at this framework was first just to look at the 3 overarching organizing principles of what UDL is. And that's first to think about engagement for students as one idea and multiple means of engagement, as well as how we represent the information for our teaching, learning and assessment program, and how we can do that again with different means, multiple means. And then the third idea was action and expression. And this is for how our students can actually demonstrate what they know, understand, and can do in different ways, multiple ways. And so with that in mind, I wanted to think about UDL in terms of assessment, and I wanted to highlight the idea of inclusive assessment as well. And so I just started generating some ideas for these 3 organizing principles of UDL that makes sense for assessment. So I've got some overarching ideas there, and I was just going to skip down to look at a couple of key ideas that I can share with you. So again, this might be the time where you think, oh, that sounds like a good idea. That's something that I want to review for my assessment this semester. So this might be the time when you make a note of something that you'd like to do later. So in terms of engagement, the idea is looking at your assessment and looking for opportunities to give students choice. So where you've got the time and energy to give them different topics that they can choose from to write about or respond to, or different contexts or scenarios, instead of everyone responding to the exact same one, that could be an opportunity for choice in assessment. And just reviewing your authentic context for relevancy. So where you might have had a context or a scenario in your assessment, I guess just reviewing that it is linked to the real world or industry as you intended, and if it needs updating or not. And I'm sure, again, these are things some of you might already be doing. In terms of representation, again, this can be a time-consuming part of assessment design. So looking at different media and modes that we can use to communicate information to students in different ways. So it could be providing a video with a transcript, not just a video. It could be providing visuals, diagrams, graphics to illustrate words or dense text. Again, you might set a goal to do some of these things for a particular semester over time. Just looking for those opportunities, I guess. Optimizing access and display. So we'll touch on that idea of optimizing display through assessment in digital assessment today. And then for action and expression, the idea here was to think about, are there opportunities within the same assessment task where students could respond differently? So it could be in the same task. Does everyone have to write an essay, or could somebody write an essay and somebody make a poster and someone do an oral presentation? Or if that's too big a headache for the same task to be multimodal for students to respond to, across your program or your course, are there opportunities for different ways of students expressing what they know, understand, and can do? So maybe instead of 3 essays, there's an essay, exam, oral presentation. I know some of you are already doing that, but it's just reviewing that and looking for that variety and different ways students can respond. And something that might seem very independent for students is the idea of goal setting, where you could help target students' preparation for assessment and study for assessment through some guided goal setting, so that they can, really target their time and effort for preparing for their assessment. Also, still talking about UDL and inclusive assessment, I wanted to share this idea of thinking about our students that might be accessing a student access plan, which is relevant across the course, or students who might access alternative exam arrangements. Noting too that we're getting feedback that some students are actually eligible for an SAP or AEA, and they don't ask for it and they don't access it. So when we think about applying ideas for UDL, it could be thinking about those common requests we get from students in advance, so that instead of waiting for the student to ask for that adjustment, we've already preempted the typical adjustments through the way that we've designed the assessment. And so what we've also received feedback is that this can help to reduce the individual adjustments for students, because you've anticipated from a previous semester the types of things that students are asking for to meet, their individual needs. We've also received some feedback that when we think about UDL and representing information in different ways and giving students different ways of telling us what they know, and we make things really clear and we set things out in a way that is straightforward, it can help to reduce some of those academic integrity issues where the students might report back that, well, they weren't sure what to do, so they outsourced it. Whereas if we can help make it clear, it might empower some students to feel like, you know what, this is achievable for me, I can actually do it. Maybe I won't outsource this task. I won't go into detail. I think you know what I'm talking about. So in terms of that outsourcing, so we'll just go and have a look at the next idea. Now, this is where I thought I'd take a moment to hear from a few experts from Deakin University who work in the Centre for Research in Assessment and Digital Learning. So I've got like a 1-minute clip here just to reinforce why taking the time to try and incorporate UDL can be beneficial.
I agree with you, Mary. And I think, you know, a common thing amongst all students is stress and anger and frustration with assessments that just aren't clear, that weren't communicated clearly, that you get very little feedback on, and that makes you do something that you weren't really interested in doing in the first place. So I think a lot of what happens in universal design reduces all of these issues, and therefore students come out being more confident about what they're doing. Hopefully it reflects in their grades and their success in the course. And you know, happy students, satisfied students are just wonderful to work with, and you know, hopefully motivates them to keep on going in the future.
This video.
Okay, so that was a just a snapshot from the Cradle project, which was also featured in a UDL course that was available. If you wanted to know more about that, you could let me know and I'll link you up. So my takeaway from the idea of using UDL is just to think about assessment being one size does not fit all, and trying to, again, anticipate those individual student needs at the time of design and the time of preparation, instead of waiting for, you know, distributing the assessment and then finding out there's something that didn't meet the needs of a student, particularly when it's familiar and it's from past semesters. Okay, so then the other research-informed idea I wanted to share with you, or approach, was this idea of the digital teaching threshold standards that were developed by UQ, particularly Italy, from last year. And there are 8 organising ideas here, and they all have their own sub-ideas. And I just wanted to cut through and identify some key points relevant to assessment. So of those key points, I just wanted to highlight that when we talk about course scaffolding, we can make sure that it's mapped to our assessment, thinking about usability and structure, and that it's consistent across the course, including assessment. Communication materials for students are simple and clear, including how to prepare for your assessment. Interaction and collaboration to engage students, so that there's an opportunity to ask assessment questions, if you like, instead of you know, relying on email. There might be some other channels. Accessibility and inclusivity for all student needs, which kind of links in with the idea of UDL. Maybe it's been a while since you've had a look at the materials that you're using in your assessment, and if they're referenced and copyright friendly, just to demonstrate that you're upholding academic integrity as well. Also looking at student support so that it's highlighted and students might know about the SAP and AEA options up front, so that you don't get last minute requests after you've already distributed assessment. And assessment and feedback can certainly be enhanced with clarity, but also practice opportunities. So from that, I've got the last poll question to share with you. I'll just launch it now. And I'm interested to find out from you if there's something here that you would like to focus on for this semester in your assessment. So I can see a few people have started responding. So far, 3 out of 8 are taking your interest. And we now have responses across all 8 now. Okay. So it slowed down, so I'll end the poll now. I'll share results. And so what we can see now is that it's fairly even focus across those 8 key points of the standards, but it looks like there's a focus on making sure our assessment is mapped to the course, like throughout the course consistently, as well as that interaction between students, so student to student, but also student to teacher, so that they can be talking about assessment the whole course, so that there's no flurry of questions at the last minute. Yeah, so a few focus across there from everyone, all 8 are represented, but the key was that core scaffolding and the interaction. So I'll just stop sharing those results and head back to the slide. And so by now you've probably figured out that there's a lot of crossover between all of these different ideas and that the approaches can be interrelated. Certainly when I look at the digital teaching threshold standards, I identify aspects of constructive alignment, back mapping, UDL, etc. So often when we make a change with one idea in mind, we can actually be supporting students in multiple different ways. And so this is where I wanted to go back to the Padlet with you and give you an opportunity to let us know what research-informed approaches that you're most likely to apply. It could be that you're already doing it, or it's something that you hadn't thought of, or you haven't been able to revisit for a while. So if I just stop sharing the slide, we can head over to the Padlet. And I need to get the question in there for you. And I can see a response already from Luke. So you're increasingly interested in UDL and applying that to assessment. Makes a lot of sense. I'm hearing a lot about it too. Waiting to see if there are any other contributions, if there's a particular approach that you're keen to incorporate in your assessment this semester. Lorna's also interested in UDL. Just waiting a moment to make sure that everyone's had an opportunity to think about something and type it in if you want to. Okay, so UDL seems to be the focus for this semester. So, and another UDL contribution incorporated with backward design to refine course alignment. That makes sense. So thanks for sharing that one. So I'm going to stop sharing the Padlet now and just jump back to the slides. Because I wanted to move on now and have a look at the examples in some questions so that you can see how some of the ideas can be applied. And this is another time when I wanted to let you know that I will show you a lot of ideas. So you're welcome to just try and think of one idea that you see that you would like to apply to your own assessment. So I'll give you a moment to think about if you're going to jot that down on paper or how you might note it. And so this is where I was going to show you some questions in the Inspira assessment platform. I've got 10 example questions in a question set that I'll share with you. And I wanted to let you know that at the very end of the workshop, we'll also make sure that we give you a copy of the question set. And I'll also remind you where you can find building guides and training options, because for some of you, you might be new to Inspira and today might be your first experience of the platform. So I'll show you some examples, knowing that you will get your own copy eventually. And that means we're going to share screen again. This time I'm going to go over to Inspira. Just waiting for it to load before I hit share. Okay. All right, so we're on the contents page of the question set that we've built to share some examples with you today. And I thought I would just click through the whole question set just so you can see what it looks like. And then I'm going to go out of the student view mode and I'll go into the staff edit mode and I'll show you a few ideas in the building side of the questions to highlight what we've done to apply some of the ideas. So as you can see, we've got a few different sections all the way down to section 8. Each one serves a different purpose. And we'll go into a lovely introductory page for you so that if you can't remember why you were given this question set later, here's a reminder. You came to a workshop and it's a supporting resource. I've also highlighted that the ideas generally link in with these 4 or 5 key approaches that we've unpacked together in the workshop. And I thought I'd start by showing you there's this academic integrity panel, which is pretty standard for all assessment at UQ, particularly in digital platforms like Inspira. There's a panel about the marks and how they're going to be allocated and distributed in the assessment that's been set up. Also a note about how to submit the assessment right at the start. And then we go into the questions. So this is the first question, which is a multiple response. This particular question just highlights, this idea of constructive alignment and back mapping throughout learning objectives and rubric. The next question is multiple choice, where students are given some stimulus and they need to understand that so that they can respond and answer the question. And all of the questions in this set are not real questions that we would set for students. They're just to illustrate the ideas that we've shared today in the workshop. We then go over to some questions where on the left, we've got the stimulus panel on the left, where I'm just sharing more and more ideas with you about how you can apply some of the ideas that we talked about today, which actually, if you were going to go in and complete the questions yourself when you get access, the stimulus is helping you answer the questions. So they're super easy type questions so that if you're new to Inspira, you can have a turn and have a go. And I'll talk through in a minute why they're applying the ideas. So we've got different types of questions there, some with data entry boxes, some with pictures, click and drag. I've got another set of questions here with a different panel on the left for our section stimulus. It goes into some more questions on the right. And so this is a 3-part question, actually, which I find is really common with some of the courses here at UQ. And so this is one idea where on the left, we've got a 3-part question, part A, B, and C, explained in terms of the fact that it's 3 parts. Each one has a different purpose in terms of cognition, because we've got part A, name and describe, part B is explain, part C is present. And then we've actually also shown the students on the left the word limits, the marks, the links to the learning objectives, the criteria descriptors. It's all matched, aligned, and linked and purposeful. And then over on the right, the student then just goes about answering the question. And because it's a different question type, there's different instructions, different requirements for the students. Yeah, so instead of one giant big question, it's just this idea of splitting it up into the 3 parts. A note about labels and how we've used them in this question set, and the design settings for this question set, which ties in with ideas about UDL. Okay. And the idea of adding assumptions and queries at the end of assessment, particularly exams, for students where they might want to let you know where something was confusing or they weren't sure and they don't want to miss out on marks. So they explain what happened from their point of view in an effort to try and get those marks that they feel they deserve. So that's a quick run through what it looks like, the question set that I've built that I'm sharing with you. And I'm just checking on my time, and it looks like I've got about 5 or 10 minutes just to talk through why some of these questions are applying the ideas, from the session, looking at UDL, teaching standards, constructive alignment. So this is the view now for like the builder, the staff member, having a look at, you know, where we put our information in to build each piece of information or question. Just going to skip past the intro there. A quick tip about the academic integrity panel that I've got here, and you'll find that the tips are pretty much in the in this heading I've used demo or for demonstration. And so that little that's a little clue that there's a tip. So basically the idea is that if you check that your academic integrity statement is up to date, because the wording might change from semester to semester, and that there are 3 different types. There's one for individual non-exam assessment, group non-exam assessment, and exams. And so this is just something we like all digital assessment to have for assessment at UQ. And there is a guide from eLearning that I've got a link there for you if you wanted to go and copy and paste that text, so you're getting fresh, up-to-date info each semester. Another little tip too that I borrowed from Luke from a question set he made recently was, because some of you are new users to Inspira, I've just got a little note at the bottom of the pages so that you know what it is that we've built. So this is an example of a not marked question called document. And, you know, I also wanted to give credit, I won't name them, but there are academics that I've been working with where they introduce things to their assessment, and I like to share it where I can. And this is not an idea from me, but an idea that I saw from an academic in the pharmacy school, where they had a lot of student questions about, well, how are the marks being allocated for this assessment? And so they felt the need to put a panel up front and just unpack it for students so that they don't take for granted, for example, that every time they see a multi-choice question or a multiple response question, that they will get part marks for the alternative they got right. Maybe the question's been set up so that you only get the marks if everything is correct. And so it's just good to let students know up front how you've set up the marking. And this is also the kind of information that doesn't have to be a surprise for students on the day. It could be the kind of information that they're seeing before the assessment is due. It could be part of the course materials for assessment preparation, and it's not a surprise. There's no worries. There will be no negative marks. We don't even need to think about that, because we've looked at that before we got to the assessment due date, and we're comfortable that that's not happening. It also lets students know you might have to type an answer, select a single answer, select multiple answers, or upload a file. There might be different ways of answering questions. So another panel here that we're developing as a new idea for assessment that's an assignment, and the students actually have a time window where they've got this start and end time, and they can visit that assessment as many times as they like to complete the assessment. By letting students know how this specific assessment is set up, it can alleviate questions, concerns, stress, if you like. Right up front, letting students know that there will be different file types with different parameters that they have to submit. And again, this is the kind of information that could be shared with students in the course materials, and it doesn't need to be waiting in the assessment platform for the first time for them to see it. It could be that they're really familiar with what's expected of them way in advance. And now we're into the actual questions. And so I've got my little clues here at the bottom here under the demo heading. And some course coordinators like to let the students know how many alternatives to select in multiple response. So I'm just going to jump up into the question prompt, and the default is 1 or more. I've decided I want the students to know there are 3. So I'm going to change that prompt there. However, in my marks, it shows students that you actually have to get all 3 correct to get the 2 marks, because it's 0 for per correct and it's 2 marks for all correct. So letting students know how you've set that up. And if you're interested in why some of the answers are correct or incorrect, it's really just when you get a chance to read these questions after the workshop, you can see that we're reinforcing the idea that we want specific wording from learning objectives and rubric descriptors in the question, not just any from the whole course, but if you're assessing a particular learning objective, that it's represented in that specific question and that specific rubric descriptor. And a note here too, that when you click on the alternative settings. If you wanted to, you could add feedback. That could be something that helps students and could also reduce student questions after the assessment is marked and released. Just another tip there. I'm just checking on time, and maybe I need to speed up with my unpacking of the ideas, but I've got another question here where it's multiple choice. There's lots of stimulus here before the question is asked. And there's also some alternatives that are numbered. Now, they happen to be in consecutive order here on screen, but it might be that you want to control that. So if I just click into the box and go to options, the default setting is random order of alternatives. You can uncheck that so that you always get your alternatives in the order that you want. And in this case, they're numbers. So we're going consecutive. But you'd be surprised how often people don't realize that they can actually go into the alternative settings and have a lot more control over the way that the information is being presented to students. And that's just something. Some of the defaults are good and some of them don't match the specific question and you want to change it. And we looked at the feedback. So I'll just go to the next question. And I've got a tip here to show you that there are some benefits to setting up the automatically marked questions. Less marking time, no marking time. However, we wanted to highlight that when you go to set up some auto mark questions, such as text entry, numeric entry, if we aren't paying enough attention to the way we set up the question when we design and build it, then there can be some issues arise from student experience where it means we have to go in and mark it manually anyway. And that actually did happen in the semester just gone where, it can fall through if we're not paying attention to those settings and the setup. So just something to think about. And also some of the auto mark questions can be fast for marking, 0 time, but student feedback has indicated that some of those text entry, numeric entry questions can be disappointing for them if they miss out on marks because of spelling and things like that. I'm just going to jump over to now we've got a text entry question where we've got a lot of information presented in the question, but no headings. So the clue in my demo notes is just to add some. So if this is stimulus, let the students know that it's stimulus. If the question is all the way down here, let the students know that. If there's particular instructions to answer the question, because we don't want anyone, we want an auto mark question, but we don't want students missing out on marks, let them know how to answer the question. And you know, the marks. So for this question, it's 0.5 marks for each answer, but there's 3 marks altogether. So you could get 1 mark out of 3. That's something that might happen. And then your answers here. So headings are something that could be handy depending on how complex your questions are. If we go to marks, you can see that set up there. And I've also got a note here about the answers. So even though I've given students instructions about capitalization, I'd hate for them to miss out on a mark because of it. So I've just added in some variety in my answers. Again, it could be that this is a small change that you make where you might have one single answer for auto answer and you want to add those variations. Just going to hit save and move on. So here we've got an instruction about marks. I'm just checking that it matches and it does. 0.5 per correct, 1 overall. We can move on. And then what's my note here? Oh, the image alt text. I actually had a situation this semester where the alt text for the images gave away the answer to the question and everyone can see the alt text. So I'm just going to paste that in and make sure it's not giving away the questions. I've changed the width from 800 to 500 so it's easily visible for students. And I'm going to move on to another question. I realize that we're running out of time for the discussion at the end about support and accessing your question set. So I might just skip through a bit quicker so we can get to the end and move on to the last few minutes of our workshop. Appreciate your patience. Here we don't have instructions. So I'm just going to quickly copy and paste those in. Some of it seems really obvious and simple, but I guess if you're stressed out and you're answering 50 questions and you really care about getting as many marks as you can, which I guess most of our students do, little things like this can really help. Stimulus, design settings. Oh, this is just a note that where you might have a multi-part question, it could be a 10-mark question and it asks the students to do 3 things in one go. You might want to let them know that the first thing they're doing is worth 2 marks, the second thing they're doing is worth 3 marks, and the last thing they're doing is worth 6 marks. Because they might only see 10 marks and not know how it's broken up. Same thing with word count. Rubrics are really cool, and there's something that we're using in Inspira. I'll just quickly show you one. So what I've got here is a rubric at the question level. So I've taken 1 row out of the whole rubric for this particular assessment, and I've just got the 1 row that's relevant to this question, so that the students can see how we're going to distribute those 10 marks based on the quality of their writing and the quality of their answer. So this is for your manually marked type question. And again, they would have already seen the whole rubric in the course site probably. They're just seeing that for this question in the assignment or exam, this 1 criteria is relevant. Here's that really complex 3-part question that I talked about. And it's really just making sure that the information is clear to students. If you are using codes, they know what they mean. They're familiar with them from the course materials, not seeing it for the first time in the exam or assignment in the platform. And I mean, sometimes with manually marked questions like text area, we can't set a word limit, but we could tell students that it's a single sentence answer or 20-word answer, just to give them an idea that, a single sentence is all you need. I can't restrict you to the 20 words, but write 20 words and move on. Don't write 2 paragraphs. Multiple parts. Splitting up the question, we've talked about that. And the last one here, upload. If you're doing uploads, as much information, especially practices, are really helpful for students so that they know what to do before that really important deadline. So I've already shown you the other panels at the end of this question set, and I think it's time for me to leave it and have a look at wrapping up our workshop for today. I'm just going to stop sharing. I'm going to go back to the slides. And our last question for the Padlet was going to be if you could share if there was a particular question that you, or an idea from those questions that you would apply to your own assessment. So I'm just going to go to the Padlet now and see if anyone's still got any energy and interest to share there. So our 5th question for the Padlet is, what example questions did you find most helpful? I'll give you a moment to think of something and type something in if you want to. Waiting to see if we get some contributions. Excellent. So thanks so much, Adriana. I really liked the additional guidelines on how questions would be marked and assessed. That's great. And again, I can't take credit for it. Actually, it's something that I've seen other course coordinators do. So I just like to share it when I get the opportunity. Thanks, Jackie. You liked having a look at how some of the questions were built and changed to check on settings and clarity. Tanya appreciates the instructions. And again, you might not like the instructions I've suggested, but just the idea of thinking about having some and what makes sense for you. Maybe you need less than what I put forward. Maybe you need more. Maybe in a practice opportunity, the students can tell you if they were helpful. And from Anonymous, we've got the structure of the components of the question. Great. Excellent. So in the interest of time, and you're welcome to continue sharing, I'm just going to stop sharing the Padlet and go back to the slides, because I always like to anticipate, and I have anticipated a few ideas here, quite a lot again. And so I've got some ideas here that you might like to take. So if you're thinking, well, I don't know, there was so much that you covered, I don't really know what I would start doing. You're welcome just to take one or two ideas from this slide and maybe focus on that. So for example, it could be just reviewing the instructions, like adding some instructions or updating them. It could be just checking your wording and, you know, the learning objective that you're assessing. Is it represented clearly in the question or the marking guide in that rubric descriptor, particularly for manually marked questions? Choice. If there's an opportunity to give your students choice, whether it's in the topic that they respond to or the way that they answer a question, if it's possible, consider it and see how you go. And so then if we talk about what's happening now, what's available to you now, we've got a range of different assessment design support options that learning designers in the digital assessment team that I work in, we can help you. So there's a team of us available. If you're already using Inspira Assessment, for example, you might have already indicated that you wanted to work with a learning designer on a design project. But also in the chat box, we were going to share with you a link to a project to redesign your assessment called Time to Redesign. If you're interested in working with a learning designer for something happening in next semester, where you want to kind of work ahead to change your assessment, we can do that with you as well. Recordings will be made available of this workshop and other workshops from our team, such as the generative AI in assessment. And I wanted to highlight that we have set up 2 writing sessions early this semester that you're welcome to attend. So I'm just going to skip to that. And hopefully in the chat box, you'll get a link so that you can register if you would like to join us for a writing session to work with other teaching academics, to share ideas, collaborate, and write assessment questions, make small minor updates. We've got an on-campus session in week 2, an online session in week 3. We'll send the Zoom link if you register, and we'd love to see you there so you can work together on your assessment. Plus, you're welcome to sign up for the new assessment design community that's presented by the digital assessment team. And you're also welcome to register for the first event for the Assessment Inquiry Network. So there should be links in the chat box. Lots of opportunities for you to engage with the team if you want help and ideas for your assessment. And if you had any energy left after all the questions we've asked today, we always love asking you what it is that you actually need and want. Is there a particular resource or workshop that you would love for your assessment design to help you and your team, whether it's a particular course or school? And if there's any ideas from today that you are most likely to recommend for someone else, we'd just like to know what you find helpful. So I'll invite you to go back to the Padlet. I won't share the Padlet though. I'll keep chatting while you think about what you might like to ask us for. I'll let you know that we will be sharing the slides again in an email after the workshop, and the recording will be made available, as well as all the other Ready to Teach Week sessions. There'll be recordings on the Italy website soon. And it's 1:49, and if I could just, some of you might want to spend another 5 minutes with me while we have a look at the question set that I shared with you so that you can make sure you can access it. I know some of you are new users. Before I jump into that though, I'm just going to jump in and check on the Padlet And I've got some ideas. So I've got 2 people asking for more resources and workshops about UDL. So that's really good to know. It's certainly a strong flavour of the workshops this week for Ready to Teach Week. And it's yeah, you have such a loud and powerful voice when you actually are able to tell us what you want. So we'll do the best we can to address that. And remember, you can add to the Padlet after today. So if you want to, keep letting us know what it is that you want, what would be helpful, and we'll keep checking it. And I can see a few of you might even be starting to make your way out. So I feel the need to say thank you to those of you who joined us today and need to make your way to another session or to a meeting. Certainly for another 5 minutes, if you're new to Inspira, I will work with you to make sure you can access it. So if you're new to Inspira, there are 2 types of guides that you can access. There are a lot of guides available on Italy's e-learning website for question building. You can also go to the Inspira Help Centre. Plus, you can actually get a lot of guides just through Googling key search terms that are associated to Inspira. So try your luck and see if you land on an e-learning page or the Inspira Help Centre. You can contact our team through a design consultation booking. You're also welcome to contact the e-learning advisors for self-paced training, getting access to different roles and technical support. And the e-learning help desk is available as well. Particularly if you wanted to access the production environment, because maybe you're excited by accessing the Training One environment today. I can see some of you are starting to say thank you and leave the session. Nice to have you here, and I wish you well. And this is where I wanted to invite those of you who want to go. You're welcome to go to UQ Staff Training One. There should be a link for you in the chat box in a moment. And I'll help you navigate to find the question set that we've shared with you. It's the same one that I shared with you on screen. Just waiting to see, maybe the link's already been shared previously. It has been. Thanks so much. I think that was Dale. Really appreciate that. So I'm going to stop sharing the PowerPoint and go to Inspira to help you navigate. And I can see there are still some people here, so it is worth going. I'm just going to share screen. Hang on. Okay, so I'm on the landing page of Inspira, and I can see we've got at least a few new users among us. And when you land here, you want to go up to the author module and select question sets. Your URL might have already taken you here to the question set page. This is where you can see all of the question sets that you're associated to. You might only have one. And what we've done for you today is added your name to the start of the question set title. So for example, we've got a question set that's been made for Peter. It's got Peter's name. So I'm just going to click on that. You should be looking for your name. And then you just click on the question set and you can go in. And in the top right, you can go to preview and you'll get that student view that I was talking about before. And this is what it looks like for our students. And then you can jump back to the build view or the staff view and go into each individual question. You might want to remove copy of in front of everything if you actually want to use it. Or so I can see we've got some people joining us for the next session. So I have to finish, but I did want to just check if there were any questions before I say goodbye. Everyone's pretty quiet. Maybe everyone found it okay. Good. All right. Well, I'm happy to say goodbye. Thanks so much for your time. I think most people have already left. And see you later.